I've created what I sort of call an overriding summary of physiology for beginning non-major students like you, hoping that, being an animal yourself, you should be able to relate and get into the proper mindset quickly. I like to identify 5 major classes of physiological function. In no particular order, they're as follows. First, there's what I call meeting the body's need for X through exchange with the outside world, where X is something that needs to pass into or possibly out of the body. Nutrients would be a good example, and animals have feeding adaptations and digestive physiologies that make it possible for them to get adequate nutrients. Oxygen would be another example of something that an animal's body absolutely must acquire from the outside world. And so as animals, we all have physiological systems of digestion and respiration and gas exchange, and all of these can be classified within this general category. The second big class of physiological function is homeostasis, where the body maintains a relatively constant level despite what would otherwise be a tendency to fluctuate with changes in the environment. One of the more obvious examples here is the way we keep a constant body temperature of around 37.1 degrees Celsius, while the world around us fluctuates from warm to cold to hot. Remember that with the exception of mammals, birds, and some fish, animals are not warm-blooded. To use the proper term, they're mostly ectotherms, getting their body warmth from the outside world. This is actually going to be the focus in the next unit, so I won't say anything more about it here. But even an ectotherm is doing homeostasis on other fronts, besides that of body temperature. There are many other things that animals and cells must regulate. Some of the most important are nutrient levels, oxygen, and wastes. Even an animal as simple as a sea jelly regulates its internal conditions by using cellular and organ-level physiology. The third big area of physiological function has to do with sensing the external world, gathering information that can then become the basis for adaptive responses. A flatworm, for example, doesn't crawl through its world blindly. It possesses chemical sensors that detect molecules associated with food, and it uses these sensors to find food. If the worm's food is on its left, the concentration of food-associated molecules will be greater on its left than on its right. So how does the worm know in which direction it should go? Well, it follows its nose. But how could the worm do this if it didn't have a nose? And yeah, okay, technically it doesn't have a true nose, but let's call those chemical sensors on the different parts of the worm's head its nose, and it's all good. The fourth and fifth general areas of function are defending the body against microbes and parasites, and reproduction. We'll talk about the immune system in the last unit, but I just want to leave things here for a present discussion which focuses on the nervous system. The connection between an animal's nervous system and the third category of physiological function, that is, sensing the external world, is the most obvious, of course. Using the example of the flatworm again, there are 2 things going on. There's the detection of high concentrations of food molecules on the worm's left side, and then there's the response of the worm to turn to the left and head in the direction of the chemicals. Here is the first basic lesson in animal nervous system physiology and anatomy. You can divide the nervous system into sensory and motor divisions. The sensory part of the nervous system is anatomically distinct from the motor part, and it carries signals from an animal's sensory receptors to the central nervous system. In the case of the worm, these would be the nerve cells that are triggered by the sensory cells, and we call them chemoreceptors because they're detecting chemicals, and these are in the worm's integument. Those signals from the chemoreceptors on the left side of the worm's body ride sensory neurons to the brain. The worm's brain is very simple, but a brain nonetheless. And then motor neurons carry signals out to the worm's muscles, causing it to turn to the left and squiggle on towards the food source. In this regard, we're really no different from the worms. In a general bio class, you'd be getting the same lesson on nervous system anatomy with a human focus. You have millions, maybe billions of sensory neurons traveling to the central nervous system, carrying information from the various sensory receptors in all parts of the body. And you have a separate population of millions of neurons called, reasonably enough, motor neurons, carrying signals out to make their targets, skeletal, muscle, and glands, do what they need to do. Okay, so that's easy enough. The nervous system is at the core of our ability to gather important information from the world around us. The less obvious part of this lesson is that the nervous system also plays a big role in the first two of the major physiological functionalities, meeting the body's need for X and homeostasis. Using our worm again, it seems that the little bugger really has no choice in the matter. The way its sensory and motor neurons are connected, it will move toward its food source. Period, and that's it. You might think that's silly. Maybe the worm can decide to move away from its food. How can I know what a worm wants? Maybe it's on a diet or something. What's really there to keep a worm from turning the other direction and crawling away from its food source? Well, nothing. I'm sure it happens all the time that a worm is born with wiring that causes it to move away from its food, toward its predators, away from moisture, and towards certain death. But those worms won't be able to pass those interesting but not very helpful traits on to future generations, not nearly as well as those worms that move toward food and moisture and away from their predators. Natural selection has shaped the neural connection in a worm's nervous system to respond adaptively towards stimuli, and the end result is an animal that's able to meet its need for, in this case, nutrition. How about homeostasis? That's the second of the large categories of physiological function. Well, yeah, in vertebrates, the motor nervous system is broken into the skeletal division, the motor nerves that go out and tell your skeletal muscles to contract or not to contract, and you have more or less voluntary control over these. And then there's the autonomic division of the motor nervous system. These are the nerves that make you breathe faster and make your heart beat faster when your body has a greater need for oxygen. These are the nerves that make your sweat glands seep out perspiration when your body temperature rises too high. Both of these are obvious homeostatic functions related to blood oxygen levels and to the regulation of body temperature. I could go on and talk more about how the nervous system is involved in both immunity and in reproduction, but this video has already gone past the 1,000-word mark, and as clever as you are with your highly sophisticated neural anatomy, you should be able to reason out these connections on your own if it becomes necessary. I'll cut this particular discussion off here and use the next video to talk more about the actual mechanism of nerve cell function.